you so much for having me, and thank you so much for tuning in today. It's really important topics that I will be discussing. Um, just to kind of give you a rundown of what I'm going to talk about a little bit, I'm going to tell you my story about how sexual violence has impacted me in my life and my journey through healing and being able to speak out openly and publicly with my story. um, we're going to go through the definitions of sexual violence because I feel like oftentimes there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of false definitions, and people kind of use words that don't necessarily apply, so those are really important. We're also going to go through a lot of myths and misconceptions revolving around sexual violence, and just rape culture and how it impacts survivors in general, and how it impacts people on the outside as well, who may see something that happens but don't necessarily step in. I really want to discuss bullying and cyberbullying and the impact that had on my life, consent stereotypes, the aftermath of trauma, bystander intervention, like I just mentioned, and then how to support a survivor. And we'll end today with very tangible ways of, taking a positive approach and learning proactive ways to get involved so that you all can make a difference as well. Statistically speaking, everybody here knows somebody who's been affected by sexual violence. And because of that, I just want to make sure that we open this up for being a safe space. These are very tough topics to talk about, and difficult dialogue that we're going to be, discussing. And I think that it's so important that, if this has happened to you, or if you know somebody that this has happened to, that, you're aware of that in the beginning, that it could possibly trigger you, or it may, empower you, I'm hoping. But more so, I want to educate you guys, because when I was in high school, nobody talked about this. They almost like swayed away from discussing any sexual violence because it was such a like taboo, like sketchy topic to talk about. They didn't want to say something inappropriate or what they deemed inappropriate, so none of my health teachers talked to me about it. We would have these sexual intimate conversations about what sex is and how it works and all those uncomfortable topics, but nobody ever told me the other side of it, and gave me the definitions of what sexual violence is, what a sexual assault is, how to identify it, what to call it. Nobody told me when I was young. So when I went through my health class, this was a topic that I didn't even realize was a crime. I didn't know that when this happened to me, it was a crime. When I was 16, 3 weeks after my 16th birthday, I had some friends over to my house because my parents were out of town, and I was never a popular kid. I never, did anything completely outside the norm. I told my parents I was having friends over, so I wasn't trying to, it wasn't a party by any means or anything of the sort. So I was very comfortable around the people I was with. So two of my friends invited two boys over to my house before I even realized. And when they came in, I didn't know them. I knew who they were because they were classmates of mine, but I didn't know them personally, and I was not friends with them. So the night, went on, and I tried smoking marijuana for the first time. It impacted me greatly. And I just remember everything becoming so fuzzy and so slow motion. I remember describing it to the police as if it were like tunnel vision. And after that, I decided, I need to go, be by myself for a little bit because I just do not feel well. And two of my girlfriends said, hey, we're going to leave. We'll be right back. I was uncomfortable being around the boys that they had invited over. So I basically just got up and went to my bedroom, closed the door, laying down on my bed, and it felt like the whole room was spinning and everything. And the next thing that I remember was two boys coming into my room, and I was sexually assaulted. at the time, like I mentioned, I didn't know what to call it. I didn't even realize that it was a crime. I was very naive and I thought, why did I put myself in this situation? It was in my house. How could it have been a crime? I didn't kick these boys out. I didn't scream. I didn't run and tear out of the room. I froze. And so I think that for a long time, I blamed myself. And for a long time, I struggled with the idea that there was nothing I could do at that point. If, when the moment that they decided they wanted to commit this crime is the moment that my choices were taken away. So I struggled with a lot for a long time in just identifying what it was and learning the terms to use in describing the incident that happened to me. So I just want to go over that a little bit. The umbrella term that is most often heard in the media is sexual violence. Sexual violence is an umbrella term. It encompasses everything from sexual assault, rape, sexual harassment, and stalking. All forms of sexual violence attack a person's sense of self, their sexuality, their body, and/or their feeling of safety. Sexual assault is any unwanted sexual contact or any contact or behavior that occurs without the consent of the recipient. This happens when a person is forced or coerced or groomed or manipulated into any unwanted sexual activity. The last term that I think is so important to remember in identifying the situations is harassment. Harassment is unwelcome and inappropriate sexual remarks or physical advances in a workplace or other professional situation or social situation, including schools. Like I said, nobody told me what these were. Nobody told me how to identify it when I saw it. I always had that gut feeling, but I never knew what to call it. And I never knew how extremely pervasive it was. This, idea of rape and sexual violence, there's a lot of misconceptions and myths about it. But realistically, statistically speaking, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. So every person tuning in right now knows somebody who has been affected by sexual violence. Millions of people participated in the Me Too movement that was launched, a couple years ago, which was amazing, but it just goes to show you the pervasive impact and the overwhelming number of people that this impacts every single day. I think that it's hard to believe a lot of the time. And when we see something happening, we don't know what to do. There are 3 other people were in my house when it happened to me. And when the police went and interviewed them, all 3 people said, I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to jump in. I didn't know if, what was happening was even a crime. I didn't realize it at the time. Knowing it now, yes, I can see how my gut instinct told me to do something, but I didn't, which is called the bystander effect. Bystander is anybody who witnesses an act of violence. The more bystanders that witness the incident, the less likely they are to call for help statistically. Everybody believes that someone else will do it. Someone else will step in. Or if nobody else is doing anything, they don't want to do everything. It must be okay. If nobody else is stepping in, the situation must be okay. I may not know all the factors involved. Or they're not sure what to do. They're not sure what to say or how to intervene. And lastly, they're concerned with their own well-being and safety in the situation. They don't want to immerse themselves in a potentially dangerous situation. And I think that a lot of times we use the overwhelming amount of people that are witnessing a situation as an excuse to not step in. We would rather join our peers and make fun of or turn something into a joke, turn a situation or something that we feel in our gut and our heart that is wrong, and it's so wrong and we know it's wrong, but everybody else is laughing, everybody else is joining in on the fun, so I'm going to do it too. It's the safer way to be. And because of that, it leads to bullying situations and the emotional aftermath that survivors go through when they do experience sexual violence. And I think that if the people in my life had responded differently after this happened to me, I truly believe that my healing journey and my ability to regain my strength and my self-worth and the core of who I was, my identity, all of it would have been greatly impacted in a positive way. If the students and my other classmates had been trained on or educated on these topics prior to it happening to me, I think that a few things, the people that were there would have known what to do to step in. They would have trusted their gut, I would hope, or they would know what to do afterwards. They wouldn't have, victim blamed me in the ways that they did. Bullying is traumatic in itself, and especially for survivors of a trauma, being bullied after the fact only further causes pain, agony, and extends the period of time in which somebody's are able to grieve, process, and understand what has happened to them. I think that the education is so important in schools because, like I said before, nobody talked about this. They talked about what happens, but they don't talk about what consent is. And consent is almost avoided because I think a lot of times, older people are afraid to address the fact that it could happen to them or it could happen to their friend or their child or their neighbor. But consent is the permission for something to happen or an agreement to do something. But how do you define permission even more than that? Through PAVE, we've created I like to call MOVES. And it stands for mutual, consent is mutual by both or all parties involved, ongoing. So at any moment, it can be retracted. In the middle of an instance, right before it, at any moment, somebody could say, no, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this. We need to do something else. Or, hey, I've changed my mind. I'm not comfortable with this. Consent is verbal. This is crucial because it can't be, I read his body language and it sounded like, he wanted to, but I never actually heard him say yes. Things like that we just assume it's consent when in fact that person is peer pressured or that person is uncomfortable to the fact that they feel obligated to do something that they're not comfortable with. Consent is enthusiastic. It's not a forced, okay, sure, or pressured, things like that. And the last thing in the term with moves is sober. It's very difficult topic to talk about because a lot of times in sexual violence, not all times, but in many times, drugs or alcohol are involved in order to use it as a weapon to take advantage of somebody. And I think it's so important to know that your ability to give consent must meet all of those factors involved: mutual, ongoing, verbal, enthusiastic, and sober, in order to fully give the consent. I think that it's so important that that we identify who we are to give consent to, and it can be anybody. It can be a teacher, a friend, a coach, a classmate, a relative, a parent, any or all of the above. It's so important to identify and know that any one of those people it could cause anybody else harm. Most rapes and assaults are committed by a stranger. That's what a lot of people think. They believe that, a rape occurs in a dark alleyway with a gun and a knife. And realistically, it can be anybody. Like I said, it could be a coach, a teacher, a parent, a mentor, a friend, a teammate. It can be anybody, a babysitter. It could be your neighbor. It could be anybody that you know. Another misconception that's really important to talk about is that many people, and it's shocking learning this, knowing who I am now versus who I was then, because I can tell you right now, I believed a lot of the misconceptions and myths. Many people believe that there are tons of false reports, when in fact only 2% of sexual violent reports are not true, are false, which is the same as any other violent crime in this country. 2%. So that means 98% of the time it's true. And I think that we need to be aware of that and acknowledge that, because for somebody to come forward and be able to find the strength to report or even share what happened to them with someone else, with a friend, with a parent, with a teacher, it's taken so much strength for that person to identify and say something about what happened to them. And I think that we as a society oftentimes blame or put the blame and the shame on that person because we're uncomfortable ourselves. Another misconception is that it only happens to women, when in fact that's completely untrue. That men are less affected by sexual assault. It's expressed differently. Each person expresses what happened to them differently, and I think it's so important to know that, and not to, continue these stereotypes that we are typically raised believing. I think it's so important to identify these gender norms, or these gender stereotypes, that from a very young age, boys are taught to be more aggressive, more masculine, more overpowering, and women oftentimes from a very young age are taught to be submissive. And I think it's so important to establish these, to fight these stereotypes at a young age, before people start to really believe and live these gender roles, if that makes sense. I think that women are also taught to be polite. If somebody comes and puts their arm around you without asking, it's okay. But really, you should be asking people if you can hug them. You should be asking them if you can kiss them. Hey, can I hug you? I'm the biggest hugger in the world. Like, I hug everybody, but every single time I ask, hey, can I hug you? Because I'm not sure how that person's going to respond. And I can tell you there are sometimes people have responded, I'm just not comfortable with that. It's like, okay, cool, awesome. Moving on. But I think that we are so used to the expectations of, you need to hug your uncle when he comes to visit. You need to hug your parent, even though it makes you uncomfortable. It shouldn't be that way. And I think that the more we learn and educate ourselves about these things, the more often we will be able to identify them and understand that every single person should be asking for your consent. And you are freely given the opportunity to deny it or to accept it. And I think that's so important to know, and so important to acknowledge at a very young age. In terms of victim blaming, I think that, like I mentioned before, if people had responded differently, it would have changed my whole life. The words that we use when survivors come and confide in us, they're so important, and they can determine the processing of that person's mind, of how they see themselves and how they see the situation that happened to them. Never say, you asked for it. How much did you have to drink? Why didn't you fight back? What were you wearing? You can't jump to these conclusions, because that automatically will establish that guard that person's going to put up against you, and it'll change the way that they perceive themselves in that situation. It's so important that we respond with a compassionate, I believe you, I understand, what can I do to help? Ask the person, do you need me to be a listening ear, or do you need me to provide you with a solution? What do you need from me? What can I do for you? Because responding in that way allows them the ability to let down their guard and trust again, when these crimes happen to us, our trust is ripped away from us. It's taken away from us by such force. And we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. And the emotional aftermath is, there's a variety of ways people respond after these things happen. Like I said, trust issues is a huge one of them. A lot of survivors get PTSD. Alcohol, they turn to alcohol and drugs. They have suicidal thoughts and tendencies. I myself, experienced what a dark, dark world you can create after a traumatic situation happens to us. I lived in that dark world for a long time. I experienced the suicidal thoughts, but I sought out help because I acknowledged it. I knew what to call it, and I started going to therapy. But that was a huge influence of my parents. My parents always pushed me to go to therapy. So if you don't have that support, it can sometimes feel like the world is a darker place than it actually is. So that's why we want to establish a community of people that show these survivors a support system so they don't feel to blame and they don't turn to things like eating disorders, self-mutilation, suicidal tendencies, depression, because that can greatly impact your life and it can greatly ruin who you are as a person. Studies show that the response of the first person a survivor tells greatly impacts their healing process. And for me, my best friend looked at me after I told her the next morning and she said, I cannot believe you're going down this path. I cannot believe that you are, starting to do these terrible things in terms of, putting yourself in these situations. And for a long time, I felt so much shame and to blame for everything that happened. My role in this, what I did, what I put myself into, that's why these boys took advantage of me. And it took me a long time to realize that there was nothing I could have done. There was nothing I could have said. There was nothing I could have changed for myself and what I did in that situation. The only control I had was how I was going to respond to it. And I think that sharing my story opened up a whole new world for myself and allowed me the ability to overcome seeing that situation for what it is and understanding that we can't control if somebody wants to commit a crime against us. But if we see something happening and our gut instinct is screaming at us, hey, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, we have got to trust that. And if you take nothing else away from today, it's to trust your gut feeling. Believe every single person who tells you they've been sexually assaulted or, they've been sexually harassed at school or on their, soccer team. Offer them local resources. Say, what can I do? What do you need? Do you need, a resource? Do you need somebody to talk to? What do you need me to do? And be very aware of that victim blaming language because it's so important. Like I said, how the words that we choose have more of an impact than we even realize at the time when somebody confides in us. Just imagine that the survivor is your loved one and be a good listener. Reassure them that this was not your fault. This was never your fault. The only person that should feel the shame is the person who did this to you. And there are so many ways that we can get involved, even if, we're not the recipient of someone telling us these things. It's a cultural change that we have to establish. And, there are a variety of ways that we can work together as a team and work together as a country and a humanity. This is not a women's issue. This is not a men's issue. This is a human issue. And you can start a PAVE chapter. You can start educating your parents, your friends, your teachers, your coaches on what you learned, on what you have been able to understand. And you can continue the education on this topic through our free online courses with PAVE University, which are amazing. You can start a Consent Is campaign, which is a really awesome bracelet that we have for all of these students in the school that has a blank line on it, and it just says consent is, and you write whatever consent means to you. Mine said consent is trust at one time, but the biggest thing is to intervene on these situations and trust your gut feeling. And, or if you know somebody that's been sexually assaulted or it has been affected by sexual violence, you can send them a survivor support package. And it, all of these different tools to allow them to process what has happened and to establish a self-care for themselves, because it's so important. If you don't help yourself, you can't help other people. I've learned that the hard way, unfortunately. Um, I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I just wanted to say that if you have any questions, please seek answers. Don't just let them, dwindle in your mind. Don't let them, fade away. Ask these questions. You can reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook. You can reach out to PAVE, which is, I think, at PAVE Info on Facebook and Instagram. Please don't stay quiet, because it'll only continue the rape culture that we have in society. The more often that we speak out as allies to survivors and as friends of survivors, the more shame we put on the people who do this to us. And that alone can change the entire world. It just has to be a community involvement. It has to be us all acting together and establishing that support system for these survivors, because there are a lot of survivors that do not have that support system. A really close friend of mine didn't have that, and it would have changed her world if she had had somebody to be there all the time reminding her how wonderful she is and that it wasn't her fault and that the days do brighten. My biggest thing is that I have been there. I have been in those dark days, but they get better. And I think that if somebody had just looked me in the eye and told me that when I was in my darkest days, it would have changed my entire life. And I think that it's so important that we are there for the survivors, because it does get better, and to just hang in there and seek help when you need it. That will be it for today, because I don't want to go over the time. But again, if you have any questions, please, please, please reach out to us on social media. I would love to hear from everybody involved so much. So don't stay quiet. Please get involved.
Delaney, that was so impactful. I know we did a session earlier with West Campus and you nailed it again on your passion for making sure that every single Lancer knows that you're a resource, that PAVE is here to support. To Angela, who's also here with us as an LP alum, our student services team, our Lake Park Educational Foundation, is excited to continue the partnership with PAVE to ensure our community has the tools and the resources that are available to ensure that all students have support. And to all the Lancers on here, please utilize the student services team. If anything today resonated, as Delaney said, we want this to be a safe space, an opportunity to be supportive of you, supportive of any concerns or questions you may have following this presentation. Knowledge is power, and we are definitely uncovering topics that maybe, as she said, you hadn't had a chance to process. So as today and days are to come and you hear more information as you're learning about PAVE and resources, know that we're here to support you, and we're forever indebted to PAVE and to Delaney for taking time to come to Lake Park this morning during Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month to share her story. So everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you to each and every Lancer who participated, and we will be sharing this recording for any student, staff, or community member that missed it. Take care.
Thank you.